Welcome to Modern Anarchy, the podcast featuring real conversations with conscious objectors to the status quo. I'm your host, Nicole.
I tried to keep her quiet, but she's screaming inside of me. I tried to keep her hiding, oh, shut up. I tried to keep her quiet, but she's a wild, wild woman.
On today's episode, Jess shares her powerful journey from shameful masturbation to relationship anarchy liberation and queering love. Together we talk about the ontological shift of leaving religion, the divine intervention of dating a kinky person, losing your virginity twice, and ABCD anal. Y'all, this episode, if you have experienced spiritual trauma, big warning here that this might be a really difficult conversation to listen to. Jess and I really get into some of the nitty-gritty of the painful, lasting effects and things that we've had to work through from our experience growing up in fundamental religions. And so if you have had a similar experience, I just want to give you that warning that this might bring up a lot of emotions for you, as it did for me, right? And I'm sure Jess as well. We kind of talk about that. And at the same time, I also found, at least for me personally, this conversation very healing. It feels so good to be seen in the level of experience that you've had, to know that someone else out there knows that pain, knows that experience, knows all of that. No one can ever really know, right? Because we're all in our own experience of this world, and no one has actually walked the specific steps that you have walked. But there are some humans out there who know a little bit more than others, and that is definitely what happened in this conversation with Jess, where we kind of found a connection in the pain that we shared together. And I hope any of you listeners out there who have had maybe similar experiences find some sort of healing in this conversation as well. And beyond that, we also get into some fun anarchy conversations about what it means to love other people, what it means to have sex. Y'all, if you have been listening to the podcast, you know that these are some of my favorite conversations to dive into, to create new language for, and to create new paradigms of how we understand relationships and connections. So this is a lovely episode with Jess. It really meant a lot for me in terms of my own healing from religious trauma and looking to the future of where we are going as a society with relationship anarchy. So y'all, I hope you enjoy today's episode and tune in. And then, there's no rules, no specific direction that we have to go in. Do you have any questions, or what questions do you have for me before we start?
That was yesterday. I was like, well, what are we going to talk about? And I looked back at things and was like, oh, there's no, because some people are like, I want to ask you these 10 questions and how do you feel about that? And I was like, oh, this just gets to be a conversation. Like that's fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's more fun that way. And then it you never really know where the conversation's going to go. So it's such a collaborative thing that I always really enjoy getting to do with other people.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So no questions.
Okay, cool. And then also, as part of the conversation, also feel free to ask me questions as well. If it starts to feel like it's too much on you, feel free to direct it back to me. So don't feel like it has to just be an interview, okay?
Tell me your deepest, darkest feelings.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm all for it. I'm all for that. So then, is there anywhere you would like to start the conversation with?
I honestly don't know. I was, Carlene, I was like, thanks for the rec, and they were like, well, she mentioned something about church and you're my church person. And I was like, all right, maybe we'll just jump right into that.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
So, I always want to talk about that. I always want to talk about masturbation and pleasure.
Let's do it.
Up for everything.
Okay, so you are sure. So you are the church person. What does that mean?
That means within the community like I'm in Portland, Oregon, in the States. And within the community here, I'm the person that does this work who grew up evangelical.
Mm.
And so when folks are coming in with that particular like extra need for support, because it is such a different flavor and depth of shame,
Absolutely.
I get asked questions or sent clients because I think when you haven't been around that indoctrinated experience, it's very foreign and people don't quite understand like how stuck things get
Yes.
in the body. So yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes, as someone who has had a similar experience, I can definitely resonate with that indoctrinated worldview and how pervasive that ideology is to your whole experience, especially with sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could you tell me then if you'd be willing to more about your own journey with the evangelical church and your own path? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really interesting because I grew up in the Methodist church, which is fairly like liturgical and service based and what have you. Definitely got sent to or invited to one of those like pledge yourself to wait until marriage kind of things. And I think that was mostly just because the youth pastor thought that that's what she should do with the youth group and not necessarily like there wasn't a big like energy behind that in the church. And then when I went to college, I got hooked up with one of the campus ministry programs, which was a very evangelical, like, we're going to pray for people to be saved. And what is your testimony? And I was like, I don't know what a testimony is. Like, because before then it's just like, well, like God created us and we love him, and then this is like, oh, well, no, you're bad. And you have to ask to be saved. Yeah. It's far enough away now that I'm like, these words just sound so weird and fucked up.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes.
And like, I also don't always get to talk to somebody who has the same, background where it's like, I don't have to explain what that word means.
Yeah.
In any event, so like went to college and got more like evangelical. I had friends, I mean, it was the I Kissed Dating Goodbye, like
Oh, wow. Yep.
pinnacle. So all of my friends were courting. Some of them weren't even like kissing or laying next to each other pre-marriage because that, could slide you down the terrible slope into sinning. And apparently the only unforgivable sin is sex. Or the one that like everyone gets shamed for is sex. And so like all of that is happening at the same time. I found masturbation and was like, oh, this is amazing. And I can't tell anybody about it because I'm not supposed to be doing this. I'm not supposed to be sexual. And so like had a massive cycle for, I guess what's almost 18 years old to 24. So 6 years of just like, I'm doing this thing that feels really good and joyful in my body. I'm praying for forgiveness, doing this like, and I can't tell anybody about it. And I'm, kind of stuck in this, just like, I guess I'm going to do this thing again that disconnects me from God and then ask to be reconnected, which is just, it's bananas. It's fucking bananas. Yeah. So that's like, that was college. I think I had 12 weddings the summer after I graduated because everybody was ready to start fucking, and that was the best way to do it. And to everyone's credit, thus far, I think everyone is still married, which is kind of amazing because that was almost 20 years ago. Yeah. And then I went to Chicago and did an inner city mission program, which is a whole other set of things to unpack in that.
I know. Yeah, I know that feeling.
And while I was there, like that's when things started to kind of be like, I don't agree with this. I don't, lots of people are really against like folks being queer. I don't agree with that. Folks are this. And then in that time, also, quote unquote, lost my virginity twice because
Mm.
it was within the same friend group. And so, like, didn't tell people the first time it happened. So then the second time it happened, that person thought that they had taken my virginity.
And then share that with your whole group?
No, like nobody
Oh,
was
okay.
sharing this, but like
Okay.
they were just like, oh, I like,
Yeah, yeah.
and I was like, mm-hmm. you,
Interesting. Okay, okay.
so it's just like I don't know how to communicate this. And then within my Christian friends, like there was just a lot of shame in that, a lot of feeling broken. And then I finally, like a few years after that, left the church and moved back to the West Coast and started my process of like, what does it mean to be an adult at 25 and not like have any clue how to do any of this?
Yeah.
Any of this stuff that should be so like, you know, I didn't get the opportunity to try things out as a teenager. And so now I'm, in my mid to late 20s trying things out and then have the shame of being in my mid to late 20s and being like, I
Yes.
don't know what an erect penis looks like. I don't know who I'm attracted to. I don't know how to go out on dates. Like,
Wow.
am I queer?
Mm.
Yeah, I think I'm queer. Okay, like what does that mean? um,
Yes.
and so it's like this interesting, like there was shame before because I was sexual, and then there was shame after because I wasn't sexual enough. And yeah, that's the
Yeah,
short version.
absolutely. And I mean, the amount of my heart goes out to you significantly. I think, yeah, my heart goes out to you because there's so many aspects that I have similarly gone through. So, like, I can feel, at least I'm assuming the weight of those transitions. When you say you come out of that and you ask, what am I supposed to do in this world? At least for me, it was such a radical thing when your whole life was centered around God. Every single decision and thought was in the concept of how is this honoring God? How is this furthering the kingdom? To stop that and to actually construct a life free of that is radically scary. It was for me, at least, because I was like,
Oh,
I don't
yeah.
know what the fuck my point is on this world then. Like, where do I go? How do I find an ethical structure? Like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I get to choose. And yeah,
Oh,
it was also
yeah.
interesting as I was coming out. I remember going to see a friend who, I mean, still is married to a pastor, is in ministry. And I was like trying to express like not wanting to go to church anymore. And like being like, okay, so like we have teaching, like we ask God to live in us. So like that means that Jesus, God, Holy Spirit is living inside of me.
Mm-hmm.
So like doing things that make my heart and my body happy are honoring God because God lives here. Like just trying to like shift my theology or my understanding of divine into something that like actually works for my
Mm.
my cosmos, and like and maintain connection with people that I had significant relationship with. And like she was kind of able to hold that space, but many people were not. And then when I decided to leave, I was just like I'm putting my hands up in a big X. I was like, I can't deal with any of this. And so didn't do anything really spiritual for a long time because it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to leave your community. It's heartbreaking to like be rejected when you're questioning or you don't believe the things that your community believes anymore. Yeah, so it's a big protective measure.
Yes, and I can resonate with that so much. It's almost triggering to be around those people and to hear their thoughts, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's at least for me, as I started to pull myself out, the way that they saw the world was so through that lens that it was hard to communicate about some ideas. And I mean, I still navigate this with my sister and mom who are Mormon, right? So like,
Mhm.
and the ability to connect with those sorts of people that see the world through radically different lenses is so tricky.
Yeah.
And I think what you're hitting on is such an important piece of like the difficulty of this experience of coming out of the church and the aspect of community that is so deeply tied into this. You know, those are your friends that you've had for years. This is your family, your friends. And once you start to ideologically pull yourself out, who do you have to go to after that when your whole community is still in that ideology?
Yeah. Yeah. Or like the thing that I learned, because I'm a perfectionist and I'm also like a researcher. And so as I was coming out, I was like, all right, I need to learn everything about the sex. Right. So like got books, and the first person I dated was very, very kinky. Like looking back, I was like, how, I mean, in my worldview, it's like, oh, that was like a little like divine intervention. It's like you get to date this person. Um,
Absolutely.
so then I'm like, oh, this is what sex is. And then I would talk to my friends that I had that weren't Christian, and they were just like
Yes.
eyes wide open, mouths dropped, like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
okay. And I was like, all right, maybe that's not, I mean, I guess it was a lot of fun, but maybe that's not the sex
Mm.
or some of the sex, so it's been a very like wild ride of figuring out what is mine,
Mm-hmm.
what gets
Mm-hmm.
to be mine. So,
Mm. Yeah. And my heart breaks for the younger you that was discovering masturbation and the joy and the pleasure that we are all capable of having with self-love and the self-care that is masturbation, and having to navigate with that. This feels so good in my body. This is healthy for my body from research.
mhm.
And this is disconnecting me from God. Oh, like just navigating that is so, so painful.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm a bad person because I
Mm,
do this thing, right? Like it's, I don't know, the being a teen and early 20 something in the early 2000s was very like very anti-sex in the Christian circles. And so it's like I could have done anything else, but because I was being sexual, like I was the worst.
mm,
Uh,
yes.
and so like that really like sits with me.
And that was also a time, before the prevalence of the internet where, kids nowadays can just Google sex positive things, and that's great. Like, this is amazing. So, back in the early 2000s, when purity culture was at its height and we didn't have connection to other communities to learn that, hey, other people do this differently. I mean, you're so in, a bubble, really.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And everybody, like I've learned, I was actually just writing about visibility yesterday.
Mm.
For my blogs, but like I've learned in like the last 5 years that there were other people in that church community that were feeling similar to me, but because we were so afraid to share those things, or maybe some people did but got shut down.
Mm.
I was like, oh, we actually like we did have a little band of explorers back
Mm-hmm.
then, but we were all just kind of swimming by ourselves. It was landlines
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and snail mail.
Right, right,
Um,
right. Exactly. So then here you are navigating in your own mind, I'm this bad person because I'm masturbating, and feeling like you're the only person that's questioning this, which then, within that evangelical worldview means that Satan, the devil, potentially has a grip on you, and that you're
mhm.
fighting the devil and his tendencies within you. And now you start to think that maybe you could, yeah, be having that sort of like demonic energy within yourself. I mean, this is really
Yeah.
difficult things to be going through. I think some people don't really understand. who haven't, kind of like what you said earlier, who haven't been in this dynamic when we say like, oh yeah, it was shameful and I felt bad. It was like, no, like this is a cosmic level scale of bad, of like, yeah, maybe
Mhm.
Satan is affecting me and compelling me to do this.
Yeah. And if I share it, like, does that mean the whole church is going to lay their hands on me and try to cast out this terrible thing that is happening? And so, yeah, a bit quiet, which then compartmentalizes your experience and fragments it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way that your internal messages about your body, the internal messages about what is good for you to do, I mean, that doesn't just drop once you leave the church. Yeah, there's a lot. As,
Uh,
yeah, go ahead.
have you talked to my therapist? Because we talk about this every week.
As someone who's becoming a psychologist and had this similar journey, it is my journey as well, every single week, right? Like that shit doesn't just go away.
Yeah, I have to do the right thing. Like, if I don't do the right thing, I'm going to be punished. Like,
Mm,
constant dread.
wow. Do you connect that to your perfectionism at all?
Yeah, I mean, that's a familial like value that was passed down, but it's also like to be a woman in the Christian church, like you have to at least seem perfect, and strive to be perfect. And
Yeah, and then if every single decision you're making, you're wondering, is this in line with God's will? Talk about the mental processing that you're doing there. So now you're looking at every single thought. Is this right? Is this right? Is this right? And the amount of self-reflection you have to have and potentially can go to, yeah, a degree of anxiety, perfectionist, at least my own experience is what I've had with this. And specifically, it's not even your actions. The radical thing that I always thought about the evangelical church is that it comes to this point where it's also about your thoughts, because thinking about murder is just as bad as doing murder in the eyes of the Lord. So when you even think bad thoughts, now you're also a murderer in the eyes of the Lord, which puts you into this really wild cognitive spiral where like you're making these huge judgment calls about who you are as a person based on automatic thoughts that we can't necessarily control.
yeah. Yeah. But isn't that a great way to control a population of people?
Yes, boy, does it work. And it is a recipe for anxiety.
Yeah.
Ah,
Yeah.
yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean,
We need to shake that off a little
I
bit.
know, right? Exactly. Like this is also probably a conversation too for both of us of like breathing through that, because like even having this conversation, I'm sure at least for me it's activating to a level of degree to connect back to those emotions and to remember where we were and feel that it's still something that, yeah, like you said, shaking that off in your body. Yeah. And I'm thinking too about, you had pledged yourself to marriage, to waiting to have sex until marriage, right, at a young age. And then to lose your virginity twice, which you laugh at, I love.
In retrospect, it's like it's all such a big ball of fucked up. But it was true. I lost it twice. I mean, and then I don't know. I like to talk about all the different virginities. It's like, well, every time you kiss a new partner, like that's the first time. Every time you try some, and so it's fun to just kind of like take that and throw it on its head. But yeah. Yeah, lost it twice officially.
And how was that experience for you?
It was very deeply shame-filled. Both times involved a lot of alcohol, because that's what I like. One, you're in your 20s, and oftentimes that's just culturally what we're doing. But it also was like, oh, looking back, it's like, oh, I can blame that on the fact that I was drunk. I didn't actually choose that. And it's like, well, you really wanted it. Like, and in particular with one of the people, I really wanted it with one of the people. And so it's like,
Mm.
you know, but there was no way to, with integrity, want it within my system of belief.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a ton of sense. So, you know, if there's a lubricant of alcohol to say this is why it happened, then we don't have to deal with the fact that wanting sex doesn't fit into the paradigm of thought that we're at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, like getting drunk is a better sin. That's how,
Yeah. Yeah.
not as bad of a sin as choosing to have sex
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
in the hierarchy of cultural sins.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So yeah. And then, you know, after that it was like, well, I've broken this for my future. At this point it was husband, you know, and then as I was progressing through, I was like, do I really even want to get married? Do I even only like men? Do I even like, you know, and now I'm like, I'm solo polyamorous for the most part, and probably won't. I mean, I might get married. Who knows? But you know, like, do whatever I want. I get to choose.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and I love the freedom that comes with that solo polyamory and all of that liberation is so beautiful, especially coming from where you were before.
Mm-hmm.
At least for me, it resonated when you said that I had broken this for my future husband.
Yeah, yeah, and that like that. I mean, that all still trickles down, right? Like even now, it's like, oh, this like this does this pleasure get to be for me too? I mean, the answer is yes. And most of the time the answer is yes, but there's still times where I'm like, oh, I should do this for them.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
do you want to do this for them? Or is
Yeah.
this feeling of obligation? Where's the joyful consent in the center of that? Is there joyful consent
Mm-hmm.
in the center of that?
Mm-hmm.
But the like the you're supposed to save this special thing for this maybe never existing person.
Yep.
Like, and we're assuming that everybody is straight
Yep.
and that because God is perfect, you're going to be able to understand how to be sexual once you have saved this thing that you've never practiced with the person that you've just entered into a sacred contract with.
Mm-hmm. It's a lot of pressure. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And a lot of patriarchy and a lot of like procreation, and the man is the head of the household, and it's a recipe for a lot of disaster.
Yes. Yeah, I think about the man as the head of the household, exactly what you said, where it was, I remember this teaching that as a woman, my job was to serve my husband.
Mm,
And true, in turn, he was supposed to serve me in the way that Jesus serves the church. I hear it, I hear it. But Jesus is still above the church in a hierarchy structure. And in the same way, it was assumed that the male would be at the top in
yep.
terms of the power and the dynamics of who was making decisions. And so, yeah, when it comes to sex, it becomes this is what I give to my husband, this is how I serve, this is how I do that, forgetting the whole aspect of female pleasure,
Mhm.
ownership over my sexuality, consent, so many pieces.
Yeah. And like even even if, right, that's what you choose and what you want, like if you're attending to pleasure of both bodies, like the sex is going to be better.
Oh
Going to feel
yeah,
better for everybody,
absolutely, absolutely.
you know? And it's like, well, what, like, even in that capacity, like, just teach people how their bodies work so that they can
Mm-hmm.
enjoy what like
Mhm.
is a really beautiful thing if it is like set up where both hearts are coming together in the same capacity, which is
Right.
not often true,
Right. Right. Right.
but it has like the capacity to be true.
Yes. And that's where like I always try to sit where it's like, to have sex until marriage can be a beautiful thing, right? I'm all for that. Even abstinence can be a kink for many
Mhm.
people. And you can look at it in that lens where, like, I am waiting to engage in sex until I am married, and that is going to be something very special that is shared just between the two of us. I'm all for that. The second, though, that you start to say that if you have sex with other people, you are damaged, you are used, you are somehow less worthy as a person and as a potential partner, that's where I start to say this is not okay, right? Like I understand the choice of
Yeah.
keeping that exclusive, but when we start to make judgment calls on our sense of worth because of engaging in sex, no, nope,
Yeah.
no, no, no. Mm-mm.
Yeah. And is it like, am I choosing to be abstinent until I'm married because that's what I want, or is because I don't want to be used or broken or dirty or discarded? Like, like
Right.
that's not a choice, that's coercion.
Thank you. Yes.
And so it's like, well, yeah.
Right. 100%. That's the question too of like, is this conscious? Is this something that you are freely choosing to engage in? And I think with, yeah, a lot of religious structures, the answer is no, because of the power structure that enforces it upon you, which then says, yeah, if you do have sex, you are damaged, and all these other pieces. So then you're right. It's not a fair, open, freely chosen decision here when it comes to that piece. Maybe believing in the religion is, even that you can ask a deeper question of like, is it a freely chosen thing when it's what you were raised in, when it's what your community was, when you were given no other models? Was that
Yeah.
a freely chosen thing? At least that's what I experienced growing up in it, right? It wasn't like I was given, hey, Nicole, you can believe in God in this dynamic, or you could not. Both are equally good. That is not what I was given. I was told, you believe in this or you're going to hell. I wouldn't say that's consent.
No,
Yeah. Mm-mm.
no, it is not.
Mm-hmm. So I think that's when this gets tricky. It's like, yeah, like I always, at least personally, struggle with this, like a boundary of like respecting people's religious choices and the beauty that is spirituality and religion, but really, really having a hard time grappling with religious structures that aren't freely chosen and that do enact patriarchal notions of so many different things, you know what I mean? Like we were talking about like the whole fucking thing. That's where I go. And like, it's so hard for me to like respect religion and recognize that it has so many patriarchal influences in it that like, can I be a feminist and even respect religions like that? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's really tricky. Could you
It's a
pull
question.
right, can you pull the patriarchal influence out of religion? I think we do see some Christians doing that, right? And like modern Christianity, who are like reinterpreting the text, having different understandings and implying, a modern understanding of, you know, all of these pieces into their notion of God. And so, like, I do think it's possible, but yeah, it's usually a very difficult line for me to walk here.
Yeah. And that, like, for me, I'm like, that's not the work that I'm here to do.
Yeah.
Like, I can hold spiritual space. I can hold space for people who are in still,
Yeah.
whether they want to be or not, like in organized Christianity, exploring their sexuality, people who've left that are exploring their sexuality. But yeah, I don't have any desire to be in the mix of the folks who are trying to, like, I don't know, like, I think piece it maybe back together. Like, what I know of Jesus was that he looks a lot more like me than he looks like the church and the communities that I run with and the way that I live my life. But, for me, there's too much, like, that's trauma that I don't want to edge with at all.
Yes, 100%. So when I hear spiritual music, like Christian music, it hits me in a way that is jarring and activating. That is,
Mhm.
it's the trauma that is there at that core.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. It's, I mean, it's a funny thing about music.
Mhm.
My last few years of being a Christian, I would often wake up with like really raunchy hip hop in my head, like it's all the time. And this was like when I was in Chicago being a missionary, which is just such a weird sentence to say.
I know, I know.
But like that was happening, and then like on the reverse, like it happens to me. I went to a really beautiful, it was like a erotic, I won't say erotic art, but it was like all like plays or like musical acts.
Hmm.
So it's honestly with this one person show on like phone sex, and I just was biking there, and like all these hymns like started popping into my head, and I was like, this is very fascinating that you've like
Yeah.
used to do this thing and now you're doing this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Why am I singing this hymn on the way? Like,
Mm.
right, whatever. Let's try to
Mm-hmm.
sing something else.
Yeah, yeah, that unconscious is coming through. Wow.
Yeah, yeah. It was like, get out
Mm.
of here.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Which is what we've been talking about, like how it sticks with you. It's not like we get out of this web untouched. Like there's still so many pieces that were, at least for me, I was explaining this to some other people where like I would masturbate even outside of letting go of the church and all this sort of stuff, but like be at home in my apartment by myself and masturbating under the sheets. Like, what? Like, I'm half there because I'm like, yes, I'm doing it, but still, like, let's do this under the sheets because I'm feeling some level of shame in my own space, in my own apartment. Like, that stuff sticks with you.
Just in case God is watching
Exactly,
you.
exactly,
Doesn't have
exactly.
direct
Is
visual
that what it
contact.
was? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, because that, you know, like I didn't even realize it until like looking back on it now, where I was like, yeah, why was I under? It's like it's a full level of shame about
Hmm.
it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I remember I equally had like a purity ring and did the whole piece there of thought I was gonna wait till marriage. And when I lost my virginity, it was so incredibly painful. Like the actual moment itself in terms of the relationship was beautiful, but afterwards processing the reality of what had happened, I had like gone up into my bathroom and just sobbed uncontrollably on the floor because I knew that I was no longer worthy, that I had just ruined my one shot at purity. And that was it. So I just cried uncontrollably.
Yeah.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because we feel broken, like we're worthless, and who's gonna want us now that I've done this?
Yeah. Yeah. That I've done this, which is one of like
Mm-hmm.
the most beautiful things you can do with a body.
Mm, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Ugh.
I know. I know. I mean, it's deep. That runs so deep that I remember the message of the rose. Did you ever hear that one where there was a evangelical pastor who had the rose and he passes it all around and like the petals fall off.
Oh yeah.
And then he was like, when you have sex with all these people, you're like the rose and you lose all of your petals. And they're like, who would want this rose? Who? And that's what I felt. I felt
Yeah.
like I was no longer worthy. And yeah, no one was going to want to be with me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why not everybody understands what it's like to work with folks that come from our backgrounds.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. Because this wasn't, at least for me, and I don't know about you, but this wasn't just a part of our life. It was our whole life. And the way that we understood ourselves in the world and in relationship to other people was all centered on this ideology.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And whether or not like you get to spend eternity with God or not.
Exactly. Because the or not, let's be very clear, is teeth gnashing at your skin with fire. Like, I remember the verses in Revelations, they were very serious that like people are going to be gnawing at your skin while you're burning alive in hell for the rest of our eternity. That's what the not God option is.
Yeah.
Which also, like, respecting religion, if we took that same exact paradigm into another religious context that maybe wasn't Christianity, and I said, I've started this religion where I believe in this dragon, and if you believe in the dragon, you'll spend eternity with the dragon, and if you don't, you'll exist in fire with people eating at your skin for the rest of your life. And I started telling this message to children. I wonder, I'm not going to say anything, but I do wonder if people would ask if that's abuse to be telling people this idea, this structure, where that's the sort of dichotomy options you've got.
Yeah.
You know? I think sometimes we forget, like, it, Christianity has been so normalized because of the history and all of those other pieces that, like, if we took it out of that context and said word for word the ideology that we're putting in another context, I think it's more clear of like what sort of potential emotional abuse we're imparting on people with this.
Yep.
Yeah. I know. Then the beauty of that journey being like you and I both go through something like that and then come out of the other side of it, because you said you're a researcher, you know, here I am becoming a sex and relationship psychologist doing the same thing of like, well, I went through this radical trauma, I guess I'm going to study the hell out of it. You know what I mean? So
Let's
thanks.
dig into that shit.
Exactly. Thanks, Christianity. Love that. You prepped me for a good career. Yeah. And now you said that you identify as solo poly.
Yeah. I like sometimes I'm like, I'm a relationship anarchist, and then other times I'm solo poly, and I like it just really usually depends on like, do I want to have this conversation with the person that I'm talking to?
Yes. Can I ask you to have that conversation as someone who's writing their dissertation on relationship anarchy?
Yes, absolutely.
Tell me. Yeah, what's the dichotomy there?
It's that like people, when you say the word anarchy, clench. And so that's like, and then I'm like, well, whatever I tell you after this, you're already like pulled in and not open. And then polyamory, even though like solo polyamory is like you are kind of your own primary and you have a lot. I don't want to say that people in other dynamics don't have a lot of autonomy, but like there's more space to be autonomous, or for me, coming from the history that I do, I'm way less likely to fall into submissive patterns that I don't want to be in. This is probably the best way to put that.
Yeah.
And so like I'll use that as a like, oh, people kind of know what solo polyamory is, but really like for me, it's like relationship anarchy is like I'm in love with a lot of things. Like there are plants and animals that I have significant relationships with. My friends are just as important as the people that I fuck, who are also my friends, but they're just the ones that I do that thing with versus crochet with, or, you know, like, and just kind of breaking, I think, breaking down hierarchy and queering love is really important to me.
Yes.
And so like I, you know, semi-jokingly started calling my garden my girlfriend. And I'm like, no, actually my garden is my girlfriend. Like I hold hands with my raspberries and I like kiss my current bush, and I like it is a significant relationship and it's reciprocal. And, you know, and so yeah, I don't know. That's my, when people can hold that, I like to share. And then when, you know, when people like are just like, oh, well, you broke up with that person, so you're going to start seeing these other people more. I'm like, this is not a time for me to do free labor.
Yes.
Like,
Amen to that. Yes.
if you want to learn more about this, please just like, you're not trying to meet me. You're trying to like pigeonhole me, or like, and that's not what I'm I'm not here to do that. Or you can come to this workshop.
Exactly.
Talk about it here.
Because it absolutely is labor to explain that. A lot of people, even just that, like solo polyamory, relationship anarchy, a lot of people don't know those terms at all. So like, yeah, even having that discussion is a act of labor to teach and to explain. So I think it makes a ton of sense to have boundaries of like when we say these labels and when we don't, and recognizing like the context of the situation. It's code switching, right? To a degree, because of this identity and the lack of understanding of it, of like when we say it and when we don't.
Yeah. And I've been good at code switching for a long time.
Yes, thank you, Christianity, for that lovely skill.
That one. You want me to walk into a church and talk to everybody and they'll understand what I'm saying? I can do that.
Yeah.
It's gonna feel real gross, but I can drop into that culture.
I loved what she said about relationship anarchy being like, yeah, taking off the hierarchy and seeing the value in all the relationships that you have. And I think that's something that it's true. When you say anarchy, people freak out. People do freak out. It's part of why I named the show Modern Anarchy, was because of relationship anarchy. But I think at its core is this like idea of, yeah, love. You have love for your friends, your pets, your family, your garden, all these different pieces. And why do we have to say one love is more meaningful than the other, or that more important to you in your life than the other?
You don't. And when people say that, they say that, most of the time I'm like, you're just bold-faced lying. Like your best friend is more important than your husband. You just happen to be married to your husband. Or your sister is more important. Like, and so I think also part of it feels like, can we just like tell the truth? Like, can we tell the truth about the things?
Absolutely. And I think even that can be tricky though, like telling the truth about things. I think some people do, at least from my own experience of the world. Like I fell into this space of like, no, my monogamous partner is everything, Jess. Like it is everything. It is the most important, like for sure. But I think that world is kind of what contributes to marriages failing. This world where we look at your monogamous partner as your whole community, which once was, built with religion, community structures, other sorts of stuff where you spent out that relational energy, and to look at your partner as the one and only, which at least I've done in my past, and see it in that way is like, that's how it fails, because you stop recognizing the importance of your friendship and how beautiful that is, because the two of y'all are going to relate in different ways than the way that you relate to your primary partner, if that's what we're doing here, right? Like the way you relate with all these different people is unique. You cannot compare them. There is no comparison between the relations. You might have deeper levels of intimacy, right? Depending on the time that you've spent with this person, type of engagements that you do that mean intimacy for you. Like there's different levels to that, but the potential for meaning, I think, is what we have to focus on, is like your friendships, if we use that label, right, whatever, are just as meaningful because they're a relationship you have with another human, and can be just as meaningful as a sexual relationship, just as meaningful as a romantic relationship, and all these different relationship structures you can take.
Yeah. And then it also gives choice.
Yep.
So it's like, oh, well, you're my girlfriend, so we have to do this. And it's like, well, you're my girlfriend, so like, what do you want to do? Do you want to be called my girlfriend? One of my sweeties, they only use the word, I say sweetie, they only use the word friends. Like we are friends. And that's just like, that is how they navigate their like constellation of significant relationships. And then like other people are like, oh, you're my girlfriend, oh, you're this, oh, you're this, so you're like you get to show up however. I
love the word constellation. I think I'm just like in the thick of it, because right before this I was writing my dissertation, so I was like doing all sorts of research on all this sorts of stuff, like diving in. And one of the blogs I was reading about it had talked about it as like a constellation, and I use that word in my research too. And thinking about our systems in terms of orbits, like,
Mhm.
and I've got some comets that come around once a year, we have a great relationship, and I have some relationships that orbit around me more frequently, and being
Mhm.
able to, like, I'm not saying one planet is more important than the other, but they have these different structures around
Yeah.
when I see them and how frequency and all that sort of stuff. And I think as we find language for these types of relationship structures, we're still like developing that, right?
Yeah.
Something like, yeah, orbits, constellations. I like these words to describe our relational field, our relational community.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And even just like, I don't know, I think a lot about the emotional, like, I don't want to say emotional intelligence, but that's the word, like, of within all of these different structures. It's like, well, with this friend, how do I communicate well so that we are showing up and meeting each other? And in this like romantic relationship, how do I communicate well so that we're meeting each other for like whatever needs and desires that particular connection has? Which like we put a lot of emphasis culturally on like you do that with your spouse or future spouse. But like what if we attend to all of our relationships in that capacity? Because then it's like, oh, well, you're my friend that I like to drink whiskey with and do yarn projects. And that is like a beautiful gift of shared experience and relationship. But then if it's like, oh, I'm having a really hard day and I need to tell you all these things and we haven't agreed to that, like we're just here doing this like fun talking about Netflix and getting tipsy. It's like, are you willing to hold that container? Is that where we're going with this? Like, let's check in about that.
Right.
And it requires a lot more work, but there's a lot more clarity around like what we're.
Yeah, emotional support, right? Like that's a resource, energy that we're asking of other people to
Mhm.
give to us when we need emotional support. And yes, we give it back, in other ways too. But like, yeah, if your relationship dynamic is more doesn't typically have that level of interaction, then to ask for that, I think it is important to ask for that, right? Like that is
Mhm.
not a part of your dynamic. Like, hey, do you have the space to hold this conversation? I know this isn't what we usually do. I'd like to incorporate that, and being able to have that kind of communication. You're so right that like we only seem to put that amount of effort and focus into your spouse relationship, where you might have those conversations of like, how's our relationship doing? Do you feel seen? I mean, some people don't even do that, and I would highly recommend doing that, like step one. But also, like, I think it's very important to do that with your other relationships as well, as like checking in. How are you feeling? How are you liking the dynamics? Like, and those sorts of pieces to make sure there is that open line of communication.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or even like, do you like it when I hug you? Like,
Yeah.
because everybody comes from different touch experiences in their family and their culture. And yeah.
Yeah. The one thing that always gets me too is emotional fidelity. Yeah.
God.
That's something I've been writing about in my dissertation, like this idea of emotional cheating. It's
That's
fascinating
such a homophobic term.
because the second that you're queer, you realize that, oh no, if I have an emotional relationship, because, I'm a cis woman, if I have an emotional relationship with another cis woman that I potentially, because I'm queer, could be attracted to, is that emotionally cheating now to my spouse, quote
Mhm.
unquote. And then at that point, you say, oh shit, then I can't have a relationship with anybody that's equally as important because it's going to threaten the emotional fidelity with my spouse.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Or if you're in a straight marriage, of course you can have a best friend who's the same gender as you. And that's not emotional infidelity because you're obviously
Mm-hmm.
not going to be attracted to that person. So it's fine. But if you get emotional support from another person of the quote unquote opposite gender, then that's you having an emotional affair, which is
Yeah.
bananas.
Yes. Absolutely. Like, I think if we could just have that idea infiltrate, we could have a better society of like normalizing intimacy. Like keep the monogamy, sure, but like allow yourself to have emotional intimacy with other people. And that's okay. And that's a beautiful thing. And it doesn't have to, if we can take anything from the ideas of polyamory, right? It doesn't have to threaten the beauty of your relationship that you have with that monogamous partner if that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And even physical intimacy. Like,
Yeah.
I think if folks could get basic touch needs met elsewhere, the like intensity of sex needs in relationships would be much softer.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's interesting, at least as a cis woman that has cis woman friends, we tend to be more touchy. I've noticed, you know, like we're more like, oh, hug, kiss, you know, like, you know. But then the idea of doing that with other cis non-binary people can kind of create this sort of like dichotomy where like, yeah, what does it mean if we're having this dynamic? And I think this is where it gets really tricky, and I don't even know how to have these conversations of to people who haven't had this level of reflection on the abilities to have physical intimacy. Having physical intimacy with them can actually they like mean so much more than what I'm meaning it to. Do you know what I mean? Like if I were to go to, and I'm also careful of saying like a cis het man and like what that means. I know not everyone fits into that label box of like, you know, but like if you go to someone like that who's not thought about all this and I start to snuggle, then that means that, oh, we're gonna kiss and have sex and like do all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
There's like this slew of expectations because we haven't normalized physical intimacy in those interactions that like, yeah, just going into that sort of touch means A, B, C, D, and E, F, J, you know?
Yeah.
So then it's so, this is where
Yeah.
I find trickiness of
ABCD anal. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. ABCD anal. Maybe that'll be the title of the episode. Because yes. And then so I've been at least trying to do that work with my friends of like, hey, like I would like to have physical intimacy that's not necessarily sexual. Can we have that in our dynamic?
Yeah. You know, and then it's like, oh, you're weird for asking that, but it's like, oh no, that like that opens up the possibility of that happening, and like your needs getting met, they're probably unthought of need
Yes.
has an opportunity to get met.
Mm-hmm.
And then that like, I don't know, like the beautiful thing about that is like that then it starts to shift the culture of like, oh, snuggling can just be snuggling. Unless we've agreed that snuggling then means that I'm going to kiss you, and then it means I'm going to do this, and then it, you know, like,
Yes.
but it, you know, it's the physicality escalator.
That's exactly what I was gonna say. The relationship escalator is what I was thinking of. So yeah, maybe it's like a physicality escalator or an intimacy escalator because it's totally there too, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, because we haven't deconstructed at least platonic touch to be in that. So I like that. Physicality escalator. Absolutely. That's a great word.
We're heading this
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And like, can we slow down enough to have conversations to create relationships that work to meet your needs, to meet the other people's needs in your life that are unique to you, so that you don't have to ride that escalator all the way to the top, and you can find whatever step works for your dynamics.
way.
Yeah.
Yeah. It just made me think of like, I always love asking people, and clients in particular, like, well, what do you mean by sex?
Yeah. What does sex mean to you? Great question. Mm-hmm.
Like, and then they'll be like, well, you know, like intimacy. I'm like, I would like to know like what parts of your body are doing what with other people, and are there toys involved? Are there other people involved? Like, I need to know the specifics, because that's where like we get to start pulling it apart.
Yes, I love that you're hitting on my dissertation. It feels so good for me
Yeah.
because these are the ideas I've written down by myself in my own like research silo of like, yeah, what does it mean to cheat? What does it mean to cheat on someone, right? Like, is that holding hands?
Yeah.
Is that snuggling to some people? Is that a kiss on the cheek? In other cultures, that's a hello, and
Flirting, which is just part of
exactly.
being human.
Exactly. Exactly. And like we'd say like, oh, that's cheating, like so I think all of that is wrapped under this umbrella of like sex. Because like within the
Mhm.
idea of monogamy, it's like you only have sex with me. Okay, what does sex mean? Is snuggling a part of that umbrella for you?
Yeah.
And especially gets complicated when, yeah, you're talking about the pairing of like an opposite gender with that, right? There's the heteronormity, like all that sort of pieces coming in of like, you know, this is why I
Yes.
love queer deconstruction theory. Like it just takes it all apart and you're like, "Oh yeah, none of this makes sense." Huh.
None of it makes sense.
Huh.
Everything is a sham.
Yeah. But then
Yeah.
the beauty being that like if we do take this time to construct it, more needs are going to be met. You have more space to create a relationship that meets what you need and what you want in your life. And that is a beautiful thing.
Yeah. And it's like everyone gets a disservice of like sex is penis and vagina. If we're lucky, 2 orgasms. Like, it's like it no one is served by that because it's like, well, how many nerve endings do you have? What are your emotional needs? What are your actual desires? What like is your energy? What is, your trauma
Mhm.
history, all of that. Like, and bodies can do like they're fucking amazing. Like you can have
Yes.
orgasms without being touched. You
Yes.
can like you can have really great sex without taking your clothes off. But it's like unless you're allowed to like I don't know, like horse blinders even, but like just be like it's not a whole box of crayons, like it's literally like all the art supplies that ever existed are potential.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm.
you can choose to be like, I would like only red and yellow crayons. And that's a great choice if you want to choose that. Or you can choose like a whole bunch of other shit.
Exactly.
But you can't
Exactly.
choose if you don't know.
Exactly. Exactly. And look at all the beautiful colors you have in that box. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing wrong with red and yellow. Nothing wrong. But wow, there's a whole spectrum of colors. Like, whoa.
Yeah. And then
Mm-hmm.
there's paint, and then there's clay, and then there's like
You're telling me there's a whole art world out there?
yeah.
But yes, there's like, yeah, there we go. Kink, all the whole range of what sexuality can mean when we expand our ideas beyond, yeah, the penis, vagina, potentially orgasm, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
script.
Hopefully orgasm.
Exactly. I know the orgasm gap, just like if we could change one thing, it would be that, right? Changing that orgasm gap. My God.
That would be yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That and like getting rid of the word foreplay.
Tell me your
I would
little
get rid of that word.
manifesto on getting rid of the word foreplay. I like it.
Well, foreplay for me is just sex, right? And it's like, oh, we've been sending like sweet and dirty texts all day. Like that is part of sex. We like glances part of sex. I don't know what is foreplay for straight people? Giving a massage. Like,
Let me tap
like to
into
be fair,
that.
like I massage a lot of my partners, but like that is all for me, like that's all sex. Because the like I really do want to have orgasms. I love having orgasms, but like for me, the whole point is like how much pleasure can this person and I engage
Yeah.
in the ways that our two bodies like to,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and some people like I have some people where like it very much looks like missionary fucking and it's great.
Yeah.
And then other people where it's like, did we take our clothes off? I don't remember. Like, did we both have multiple orgasms? Yes, we did. So like,
Yes.
is that not sex because like our genitals weren't touching outside of our clothes? Or maybe even not at all?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Like, I mean, yes. The answer is yes.
Yes, but
But it like, yeah, I just don't like the idea of like foreplay is the thing that you do before the sex.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
All of those things are sex
Yes,
to
literally
me.
the right. Yes, I agree they are. And like even the word itself, foreplay, before play. Wait, what? Okay, so you're telling me that what I'm doing here is not the actual play part of the equation? Like, what are we creating? And even that, like, word choice, of
Yeah.
saying, like, yeah, this isn't the play part. This is just the, warm up or whatever. It's like, no, this is the game. Like, this is the play. This is the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And dare I say, all of those pieces that you do in that part should be incorporated throughout whatever ensemble that you're engaging, whatever, song you're creating with another human and your bodies and your mind and experience. It should be all. We don't paint with just red and yellow. You know what I mean? Like paint with the whole box, people. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. All body parts.
Mm-hmm. And brain
We
parts.
and brain parts.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of my teachers today was doing a meditation. I was like, oh yeah, I remember this conversation from a while back. But like they said, what are your genitals today?
Ooh.
Because we had like in a previous conversation, like for me, the insight I'm showing you as if people can see what I'm doing. So
Sure.
I'm like touching in between my fingers where like the web of my fingers meet. And like that, when I am turned on, that feels as good as somebody touching my clit. And so it's like, well, are my hands my genitals today? They might be. Is my vulva, my mouth,
Mm-hmm.
my eyeballs? Like,
Mm-hmm.
where is the center of pleasure
Yes.
in your body right now?
Yeah, absolutely. And as a queer person, even giving pleasure with your fingers, and are they the like they're the giving of the act here. So then are,
Mhm.
my hands my genitals? My mouth? Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of this
Who's to say?
queer deconstruction. It's got a lot of questions out here, people. You know what I mean? Of like, yeah, expanding your erotic zones, expanding your ideas about sex. And I think when you start to do that, that's what turns me on, right? Like the idea of red and yellow is great, but that scares me for the rest of my life. Like I don't want to just have red and yellow. Like I don't know if I could, like a brownie is great. Like I love brownies, amazing. If I ate a brownie every
Me too.
single day for the rest of my life, I'd probably hate it. Throw in some ice cream, like have a
Yeah,
sundae, do all of it, mix it all together.
yeah, maybe a
Yeah,
chocolate chip cookie every once in a
exactly. I want to hold a little bit of space here as we're coming into the end of our time. Is there anything that you felt like maybe we didn't hit on today that's still lingering for you?
while. No, I just feel like I'm like we could just sit here and talk forever.
I know. I know, I
Let's just
know.
keep it going. Yeah, I think I don't know. I studied sociology and religion in undergrad, and so I'm very much like thesis statement, bring back the conclusion. Also, like growing up in church, like a sermon has a cadence and it has a like we're bringing
Closure.
it together and what is and
Yeah.
I've realized I have a friend we're working on some really beautiful like undoing trauma with pleasure for folks with religious trauma. The
Beautiful.
workshops coming up, and we both realize that we write content in the cadence of sermon.
Ah,
And we're like,
yes.
let's just go with it. Let's go with it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, but I don't know. I think just like sitting with what like the curiosity and like what are your values and what do you want? Which like I say that, and that is the most terrifying question if you're coming from a background where you don't have to know what you want because you're told what you want and you do what you're told because that's how to be good and how to be holy. But like, yeah, that like maybe like side eye that question. What do I want?
Yes. Yes.
Feels really important.
Mm-hmm.
Or like, what are my genitals? What does happen when I rub my elbow on different things?
Mm-hmm.
Or my calf, or my cheek. And no, curiosity.
Yes, I think inviting more curiosity to all of these things will yield a lot of lovely results for most people, right? Like, even I know we both grew up in that Christian environment that did that, but even if you didn't grow up in that, just existing within our social conditioning and culture, there's a lot of messages that tell you it's red and yellow crowns. There's a lot of messages that tell you monogamy is the only answer. There's so many other messages. So like everyone has experienced that level of like, this is the one way to do it. And like taking a step back from that to see the full picture, to see your ability to craft your relationships and a life that is unique to whatever your needs and desires in this world. I think that's a good place to start. Bring more curiosity, ask lots of questions. Challenge the status quo, dare I say. My own
Google.
Yeah. Well, this has been lovely. I do have a closing question that I ask everyone on the podcast.
All right. I'm ready.
All right. And it is, what is one thing that you wish other people knew was more normal?
Oh.
Yeah, take your time. I got some tea.
I think like, I'm not going to say everybody because I've got like 6 placements in Libra, but that almost everybody thinks that they're abnormal and a little bit weird. And so like you being alone and being like, I'm so weird and I'm so like, I'm into this thing. Like, this is the porn I watch. This is the stuff I think about. I dream of having 10 boyfriends. Like, you're not alone. There are definitely 10 boyfriends out there that want to be one of 10 for you.
Yes.
Yeah. And so like the shame is constructed to keep you isolated, and there's enough people on the planet that there's at least 5 other people that like the same thing.
Oh yeah, go on Reddit, baby. Like you will see, like just Google whatever you're into and you'll find a whole community. I promise you, you're not alone. That's one of the many gifts, I think, of the internet age, where they're like, are other people into this thing? And then you like do a little quick Google search and you're like, oh, there's a whole community.
There's a whole community. Yeah.
Yep.
I can pay to access that right now if I want to. Amazing.
Absolutely. And the way that sense of community disarmors shame, I think, is so beautiful.
Yes. Yeah. And it's like, and that is the Lord's work.
It is. It is. I swear. I tell my mom all the time that I am closer to Jesus than most people. Like, we are doing the Lord's work of like helping people heal, helping people feel comfortable in their bodies. Like, this is God's work.
Yeah.
In my understanding of God, Yeah. Well, this has been so much fun. Is there anywhere that you'd want to plug for people that are resonating with your message and want to connect more with you in the workshops you mentioned?
So I am on Instagram at /beloved coaching. So BELOVED. Yeah, coaching. Spelling is hard when I'm not looking at things.
I feel that. Same.
And then my website is the same, belovedcoaching.net. Those are the 2 best. I'm other places on the internet, but like Facebook and Instagram or Twitter are not. I don't put a lot of energy there.
I feel that. I do. Well, this has been so lovely. I've loved all the different levels that we were able to connect on and shared experience. So it's very meaningful to me.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Thanks, Carlene, for setting us up.
Yes, thank you, Carlene. If you enjoyed today's episode, then leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcast. And if you're a part of the Anarchist community, then follow us on Instagram or nominate a guest for the show by sending in a letter to modernanarchypodcast@gmail.com. Otherwise, I'll see you next week.